Did you hear that? I did. I'll tell you what I heard. Hello, it is me, the Slim Bin, coming at you with a brand new video. And in this video, I'm going to be exploring quite a few things when it comes to my art. More specifically, this painting of my granddad here. How I got to the photo that I referenced for this painting and why it's important to not just me, but my family. That context is very important. And I will be explaining the long exposure photography that it takes to get photos like this. Why the long exposure was needed to make this photo. The very intentional decisions I made when taking the photo and then painting it when it came to lighting and colour. And I'll be telling you how all this relates to the 17th century artist Rembrandt. Now, to explain this artwork properly, I have to tell you the story behind it. That's very important to this work as it holds significance to me through my family history, not only with France, but with the people within it. And to explain this context to you so you really understand it, I have to start where many places do, at the beginning.
Well, I've been going to France for 50 years and they're all been very enjoyable and quite different really from one year to the next.
Well, I'm now 82 years old. I've been married to that lovely looking man in that chair for nearly 60 years. We've lived in Twickenham for most of our lives and we've had a house in France for 45 years.
In fact, the first time I went to France, I'd been sailing with some friends after national service, went to the Channel Islands and then along the coast of northern France. We're actually there on the 14th of July, where everybody was celebrating, and we had rather too many glasses of wine, I would have thought. So I'd just come out of national service, so I'd be about 24 years old. First went to France.
How many houses have you had in France?
Two. Well, the first one was in Les Pines, and that was really a big barn with 2 rooms. And then there was a basement and an attic. And there was no water and no electricity when we bought it.
Now, this house in France that my grandparents owned, they've had it for a very long time. This was my mum's first house in France. So many years there doing it up, doing lots of things.
So I had to put in electricity to English standards and brought a pipe down about 50 yards from the house up at the top. So that took quite some time to get that organised, and then have to bring the water into the house, to the bathroom, etc. We used an Elsan closet for the first couple of years.
But eventually we managed to make it quite comfortable. It was very pleasant. The whole village was a bit too crowded though, really, and so eventually we wanted to move on and we bought another house. Although we didn't have much land, it was a big farm originally. It had very good rooms and a courtyard and a lovely garden.
We came upon that by chance, actually. It was for sale, and we investigated and realised it was for sale at quite a reasonable price, so we bought it. Been empty for some years, and it was full of bats. Probably about 200 bats occupied the house, and their droppings on the floors were quite smelly.
Well, we had your mother's wedding. That was lots of fun, that really. We restored one of the barns. Your parents got married in the church in the village, and then they came up to the house using a horse and trap. Well, France has been the best part of our lives, really. We've enjoyed the culture of France. We've enjoyed the food and the wine, and our holidays were were very, very special. I think we've learned a lot about France.
Now, this house was the first house that I encountered in France and went to in France. Now, when I went there, it had already been fixed up and it was very nice to live in, and it was a very nice place. It had a pool, it had so many things. I go far as to describe it as amazing. It was great, it was massive, we had all this space.
very good holiday home for 20 years, I suppose, Beaulieu. It's just that we got old, and it's hard work when you've got to look after that house. And the gardens particularly, there's a lot to be done.
And after quite a few months of trying and things, we finally found a house. This house was a very good size for where we were. It was quite similar really in size to the first house that my grandparents bought.
I like it a lot. It's in a very small village. It's a square-shaped house, and our builder says it was a maison bourgeoise, i.e. it wasn't a peasant's dwelling. It was obviously meant for people who had a bit of status. It had, as your grandfather says, it has
very nicely proportioned rooms, and the sitting room with a nice fire and those nice red walls.
a lovely big hall with a curving staircase.
So that's great. You now know the context and the reasons why we have these houses in France and why they're important to us. But what was I doing there at the time? What was I trying to do in terms of art? Because you're always trying to do something in art. You're always trying to accomplish something, get something done throughout your course. Well, what I was trying to do is I was trying to move away from landscapes. Because though I had recently been doing landscapes, I didn't feel like they were coming out good. I felt like they were subpar and they were below my ability. Now, there was a few reasons for this. One of them being that I rushed through them. But I wasn't really enjoying doing landscapes that much. I had to vary it up. So I decided the best option would be to start doing paintings and photos and drawing, which were landscapes but heavily featured people. Some examples would be, well, let's take this one for example. I'm the main focus, but the room is also a part of it. So if I was to paint this or draw this, the room would be just as much focus as I would be. But what this allows me to do is it allows me to take all the attention away from here, bring it to here, and eventually allow me to develop it from not just being here and here, but to just make it here. So it's just portraiture. Because I have to say, I am better at portraiture than I am at landscapes. So that's why I wanted to make the move. Not only did I want to capture landscapes with people, I also wanted to capture the house. Now, did I do a good job of this? In my photos as a collective, I think I did. But the photos I'm actually going to use in my work, I don't feel like I captured the house properly in its early days. And I feel like I failed at what I set out to do, but I've got something else which I feel has come out better. But what did I actually do? Well, I did a few things. One of them being, I took many photos of people. Very good. And I'm going to go through a few of them right now. Now, lots of these photos are of me and other people. The goal of these photos was not necessarily look good. That is usually a key goal. But it was more for it to be people in their natural environment. So what I would do is I would take every opportunity I could to take photos of people, make sure I got it when they weren't really ready for it. Because as you may know, people pose for photos. And I didn't want that in these photos. I wanted people acting as naturally as possible. The next one is another one of me laughing and having a great time. Now, I quite like this one for a number of reasons. One of them being, yes, again, it's a naturalistic photo. We've caught someone in real life, in movement, not posing. But I'm quite proud of who I've gotten not to pose. My mum. To get a naturalistic photo of my mum is quite hard because she is always ready to pose and look and smile. And she's a big fan of the photos where you rock. It's like, smile everybody! And I thought it was quite an achievement to get one like this for my mum, because it is quite hard usually. I'm pretty proud of it, got a smile and she didn't even realise. I've changed. I've transformed. Lies and deceit, movie magic. Now this photo here of my granddad is a bit staged, but what I like about it is it captures the usually unseen side of him. His quite silly side. Now I quite like this photo of my dad here because like many of these photos it's capturing something that's often unseen in photos, which is people in their natural habitat, not posing for a photo, which is what I really like. I love photos like that. I don't like photos of people smiling, cheesing, going, ee! I like photos where people don't know what's going on because it's more reflective of reality. And though it might not be the image that you want to produce right now, looking back on it, it's the one you're going to want to see because it's more representative. It brings you back more, and that's what I love about these kinds of photos. So I don't know if you noticed, but in the last two photos, there was quite a bit of haloing around the edge of the faces with a dark face, but like a halo around this part. So that was an intentional thing. It's the contrast. I think that really helps with an image, makes it pop. Because one thing that people think is, oh, you want a dark background and a light subject, but I think you can get just as good of a contrast from a light background and a dark subject. So this is actually an interesting photo because this isn't a naturalist shot. This is very, very posed and staged. So what I did here was a long exposure shot. If you don't know what a long exposure shot is, let me explain. Exposure is quite a few things laid on top of each other. Quite a few kind of But unlike the grandad shot, the long exposure effect did not actually help this photo in almost any way. There was no need for it to be like this, and all it meant was it just was harder to take the photo. This photo does look okay, but it wasn't worth the effort that I put in. There's some good composition going on here. It does follow the rule of thirds and a few other things, but you know, it's a good photo, but for the effort that I put in, it should have been a lot better. This photo for me was a long exposure shot. Now you may be wondering, what was that weird line going across your head? That was a byproduct of the long exposure. So the idea is my dad had a candle like this, and would run around the back of me to create a line like this. He would run around the back very quickly so we could get very good lighting around the back of my head without lighting me directly. But that didn't work out quite right because the camera got blown out by this candle, so wherever it went, it left a very clear mark on the image. I think this photo turned out brilliantly. It's kind of an inverse of what people would expect from a contrasting light shot. The face isn't lit, but the background and parts and non-essential parts of the face are, and that's what I love about it. I think it has a real mysterious look to it, and hopefully one day I'll be able to paint this. I think it's brilliant. I love it. That's a creative way of using a long exposure shot. But enough of these small time photos. Let's get on to the main event, the one you're all here for. This bad boy. Oh God, let's go! Right here, yes, we're going to be talking about this image, the one this is all about, the one of my granddad sitting looking at a fire. Now, there are two things we can talk about when it comes to this image. The first one is the composition, the second one is the story. And the thing we're going to talk about first is the composition. And where do we start with the composition? Where your eye goes first, and that is... The first place the viewer looks is going to be the brightest part of the image, and in this image it's the fire and the candles. Now the fire and the candles in this image are placed in the top left hand corner. This is very traditional for art. It's seen in art by Caravaggio, Rembrandt and lots of other artists. It's where we like to think light comes from, and it's quite homey to us, and that plays into the comfortable feel. Once the viewer looks at the brightest part of the image, being the fire, that eye will then be drawn to the right side of the image. Now, why is this? This is because we find things on the right more impactful because that's where we are looking. We like to look on the right side of things. Why? I don't know, but it's just a fact. And what's on the right side of this image? My granddad. This has been done intentionally, so the viewer has to look at the whole image, both sides of it. Now this image is lit by one light source. This really helps my granddad's face stand out from the darkness it presides in. It also gives the photo a very, very unique look. And this photo also follows the golden rule, having an off-center composition. Because the image follows the golden ratio, this means that it has a very naturally appealing and homey look. So now that we've talked about the composition, we now need to talk about the story behind it. And the story is quite simple, but the composition and the way the image looks really enhances it. Well, the story is, my granddad is looking in the fire, remembering memories and remembering the past. But how does the image enhance this story? How does the image really make it feel that way? This is done by the image having a contemplative mood. This is done by it having very deep reds and an almost monochromatic color palette, being red and a little bit of yellow for the fire. Now this use of red and yellow reflects quite heavily on an evening sunset, which invokes in our minds a feeling of evening. And evening is quite associated with thinking and reflecting on the day, meaning that this colour palette really enhances the contemplative mood. One compositional factor that really enhances the looking back aspect of this image is the door. It separates my granddad from his memories. In this example being the fire. He would be looking into the fire and thinking, and thus looking at his memories. Now this door here, being vertical, creates a nice subconscious separation between my granddad and the fire. And it's also helped with the distance and the fact that my granddad resides in one half of the rule of thirds, whereas the fire and everything else resides in the other half, making my granddad very separate from reality, increasing the fact that he's thinking and not present. So that's why I chose this image. This image has a lot of power behind it and a lot of strength behind it, and I think it's very interesting and it looks very good from a technical and emotional level. Why is this relevant? Well, I made it into a painting. How did I make it into a painting? What did I learn? What did I do? What were my troubles? Well, I'll tell you all that and more right now. So what did I actually learn from making this painting? So I've learned a few things which you can almost class in different categories. What I learned in general skills and wider knowledge, which I can apply all across my artwork, and what I learned about the digital aspect of this, like what have I learned about digital art, digital painting, digital workflow, because that is really one of the key facts of this. So one of the key things I learned from this, which I had already kind of learned in a previous painting, this one here, but was reinforced by this one, is how much better it looks when you try to emulate real mediums. I think this is because it gives it grit and texture, which is something that we are quite used to seeing in the real world. And it's also what we're more familiar with when it comes to classical and traditional art. Now there are some styles and techniques and ways of doing art which really fit the smooth, clean digital look, because it does look too artificial. Now in reality we do have smooth gradients everywhere, and you can reintroduce texture, but that takes quite a lot of time and quite a lot of skill to do it that way. So it's far easier to use brushes with texture. This texture idea and this idea of using different brushes also show me how expansive the possibilities really are within this medium. It gives you the possibility to express myself far more quickly and far more abruptly and far more easily than any other medium, because of how easy and convenient it is to do, at least from my position. Because for me at least, it is so easy and convenient to start work. I just take my tablet, take off the pen, open the application, and I can immediately start doing my artwork. This is compared to many other mediums, except for arguably pencil and paper, where if I want colour, I have to bring around a lot more equipment. So this really does help. For example, in France, where I also started this, I didn't need to start mixing lots of paints and brushes. I just could start. That was great because at the time I was actually on the road in a car when I started making this painting. And I don't think I would have done it if it wasn't for that, because of how quickly and easily I could express myself. And it also allows me to continue work far more effortlessly, because I do not have to set up every single time. I do not have to mix paints, and I can continue like I never ever left, because of how nothing can change in a digital space if you don't want it to. I can always get the exact same colours back regardless. So this image took about a week and a half of actual work, but it took almost 3 months, because for most of that time it was little and often, because I had many other things to do outside of art, and even within art there were other tasks I had to complete. And what this has meant is that this image has become far more sentimental to me and far more important, because it now holds more weight. I think my ability to paint faces, as I said before, far exceeds my ability to paint landscapes, and I think one of the reasons why I'm so much better at portraits than at landscapes is because of the work I did in my GCSEs to do my triptychs here of moulded faces, and this gave me quite a good understanding of the face. Now I could emulate this with my current work by doing more landscapes, but the issue is landscapes are a lot larger scale. With a portrait and working on a face, what I can do is I can hyper focus on the face, which isn't really a massively complicated thing, and I can learn to draw that, and I can cut out things like the neck and the shoulders and the whole body really. But with landscapes, they're a lot more complicated. You have to paint a lot more, so they take more time. You can't do many paintings until you learn the skills properly. And honestly, it's slightly demotivating producing what I feel is bad work over and over again. So, at least for now, I've decided I'm going to move on for a bit and try my hand back at portraiture as almost a morale boost. One issue that I have with this painting is that I found it very hard to get the right level of contrast with the blacks, as the black next to my granddad is a lot darker than the black next to the fire. And this is because when I was making this, I wasn't looking at my granddad because I had the reference image for the fire over here. What this meant is I wasn't quite aware of how dark this was, and by themselves, each one looks nearly as dark, but in context with each other, this black here seems much darker than this one. Now, the reason it's like this is because I didn't want to use pure true black, because in real life, that doesn't exist. I learned this when I went to the Rembrandt house in Amsterdam, as he pretty much never put true black in any of his art. It was always a slight hue away from it, and it made the paintings look far more real. So that's what I wanted to do here, but the issue that I found was that I should have decided from the start what my darkest colour would be. And here, there's such a massive contrast between this dark red and this dark red. So this is due to the way colour works in light. So as you may know, there are three primary colours in light: red, green, and blue. And these three colours we use to make up the light that comes out of our screen. And each primary colour has 256 colour values or hues, allowing us to get almost the entire full range. But the way these values are constructed is in such a way where we can reproduce everything with as little as possible. And that means in the darker ends of the scale, which we tend to in our minds generalize anyway, there are less values available. There are about 10 to 20 values which most people would consider very dark, and maybe about 5 which are near black. What this means is, because I decided to mix every single colour by hand, as that's what we do in traditional art, and it gives art a more stylized look, intentionally or unintentionally, when I was trying to mix my darkest colours, it was so easy for a slight change in hand position. I mean a very slight, we're talking less than a millimetre change in hand position, could make something go from a very dark hue to true pure black. And this is what I was fighting against. So on a actual colour triangle square, the two colours which I used don't look very different in their position, but because of how colour works and what people call black crush, they do seem very different to each other when put next to each other. So in future artwork, what I will have to do is I will have to compare each one, and instead of hand selecting from this colour triangle, I will pick one base colour, and if I want variation, I will edit the RGB values manually as to have very little variation. So when I was doing the initial outline and composing for this painting here, I decided to remove many features which I felt were unnecessary in the original photo, such as the light switch, that basket of paper by the fire, everything behind my granddad, the tinsel on top of the fireplace. It was all done to make it more pure and accurate to what I present, removing these unnecessary distractions. This removes the background, and pure black really allows my granddad to almost move in and disappear into the background while staying very present, almost leaving reality and entering the blackness of his memories. This really simplifies and really makes clear what's going on within this painting here, where unlike in the original image, there was a bit of unsurety about Grandad, as that description was limited to him in the chair and the background was almost in contrast to it. One thing that I'm slightly annoyed about, I was never ever able to resolve, was the issue of the grid or grating on the fireguard because it was so hard for me to get it just quite right. At first I tried a textured brush and that wasn't super successful, and then I tried just drawing each line individually. That looked a bit better, but it also looked very fake. So I decided in the end to leave it out. Maybe in the future I'll think of a way to do it and I'll come back and implement that fireguard grating. But until then, it's one thing which I wish I knew how to do. So this image shares quite a bit of resemblance and similarities to Rembrandt's self-portrait. This artist here, Rembrandt, he was a very famous artist from Belgium. I went to his house recently in Christmas. This was actually the time that I started making this painting, was very, very shortly after I went there. So he did inspire me quite a bit, and I had already done and looked into Rembrandt at times before. So he really was an inspiration for this photo. I feel like I took quite a bit of inspiration from his later work, which was a lot more self-reflective, as this painting was all about reflection and looking back on your environment and your past. Now, Rembrandt was a 17th century Dutch painter and teacher and art dealer. One characteristic of Rembrandt's work was a contrast between light and dark, like this painting has. And 17th century Dutch interiors, like the ones Rembrandt is in, were often lit by one single light source, whether it be a window, candlelight, or a fire. Again, very, very similar to this painting here, having one true light source. Now, Rembrandt painted 70 self-portraits throughout his lifetime. This really gives a good view of the kind of self-reflection and also a good view on his aging throughout his lifetime. In his later life, his self-portraits became extremely and increasingly self-reflective, like this painting is, and had an air of melancholy. This is because his life started off so great, he was so successful, and then it went downhill very soon afterwards, having him lost his wife, his 3 children, early life, and many other things, including his wealth. Sadly, he did actually abandon that house in his later life, having to sell it because of how much less wealthy he was later on in life. The self-portrait I feel I take most inspiration from is his self-portrait from 1665. Look at that number, 1665, am I right? Woo! Now this has some technical similarities to my own image, having much broader, thicker and looser brushstrokes than his earlier work, which mine has right now, but I've always had nice, broad, thick and apparent brushstrokes in most of my artwork. And Rembrandt's earlier work did actually tend to be a lot smoother and a lot more photorealistic. And this thicker look is quite closer to my artwork in digital medium, because I feel in this day and age with the camera, there is very little reason to try and fully emulate reality. It takes far longer and can come out far, far worse than if you accept and almost elevate what makes painting and what makes it special. So that's what I try to do in my artwork. In the spirit of Rembrandt and classical art, I did actually mix all these colours by hand, selecting each one from the classic colour wheel and iterating on them, as not to sample directly from the image, which is so easy, but I feel like it almost takes away. Real images are made up of so many colours which blend together when you look at it as a collective. So like Rembrandt's self-portrait, mine is of an old man in a reflective mood looking back on his past and his life experiences. Rembrandt used a limited colour palette, as did I, his colour palette being mostly skin tones, having his jacket be made up of dark colours and dark tones from the shadows he used in his face. The only thing that's separate from this is his red ape, and he also has a plain brown background which fades from light to dark, much like my own, starting quite light and going very, very dark. Now this image has quite a simplified composition. Like my one can be broken down into only being 2 squares really on my image. And Rembrandt's is also simple, but in a slightly different way. He has 2 circles on each side of the image. These circles come over and they clash and intersect with Rembrandt, showing how it has a off-center composition, as these circles are centered to the image, not the composition. This highlight makes it feel far more natural and far more at ease, as opposed to a perfectly centered, straight-bodied person. I've got 30 seconds, 30 seconds. Now in Rembrandt's artwork, he almost seems to dissolve into the background and the darkness of it, like in my image. Thank you for watching, have a great day, bye bye.